The mimosa that learned to ignore you. Most people who've touched a Mimosa pudica have watched the leaves snap shut and assumed that was the end of the story. In 2014, a researcher named Monica Gagliano decided to find out if there was more to it. She set up a simple apparatus that dropped the plant from a short height, enough to startle it into closing its leaves, but not enough to cause any damage. Then she did it again, and again, and again. The plant kept closing its leaves the first several times, the way you'd expect. But somewhere between 50 and 60 drops, it stopped. The leaves stayed open. The plant had, by any reasonable definition of the word, learned that the drop was harmless and stopped wasting energy responding to it. What made this harder to dismiss than similar observations was what happened next. Gagliano left the plants alone for 28 days, then dropped them again. The learned behavior was still there. The plants that had been trained to ignore the drop continued to ignore it. Plants that hadn't been through the training closed immediately. Most people assume the leaf folding is a simple reflex, like blinking. This experiment showed it's conditional. The plant distinguished between a harmless stimulus and a threatening one, stopped responding to the harmless one, and retained that distinction for nearly a month. It has no brain. It has no neurons. It passed a learning retention test that some vertebrates fail. The garden pea Pavlov experiment. Garden peas are one of the most unremarkable plants in common cultivation. People grow them, eat them, and give them no further thought. This makes the 2016 experiment by Monica Gagliano somewhat awkward. She set up a Y-shaped maze where pea seedlings could grow in one of two directions, with a fan blowing air and the light source positioned at the junction. During a conditioning phase, the fan always blew from the same direction as the light. The plants grew toward the light, which is expected. Then Gagliano removed the light and left only the fan. The plants grew toward the fan, which is not expected at all. They had associated the airflow with the light source, and in the absence of the light, used the airflow as a substitute cue. That's associative learning, the exact cognitive mechanism that made Pavlov's dogs famous. The experiment was contested by other scientists almost immediately, which is, to be fair, the appropriate scientific response to a vegetable demonstrating a cognitive ability previously considered exclusive to animals. Gagliano's results have not been cleanly replicated to everyone's satisfaction, and the debate is ongoing. But the result, if it holds, means a pea plant running on water and sunlight produced the same basic learning outcome as a dog in a laboratory that earned its researcher a Nobel Prize. The pea has not been nominated for anything. Plants have something that looks alarmingly like nerves. When something damages one of your cells, your nervous system sends a signal. The information travels fast, it reaches other parts of your body, and your body responds. In 2019, a team of researchers published a paper in Science showing that plants do something structurally similar, and the molecular hardware involved should probably make you uncomfortable. When a caterpillar begins chewing on an Arabidopsis leaf, a calcium wave propagates from the wound site across the entire plant in under 2 minutes. The signal doesn't wander or diffuse. It travels through specific tissue at measurable speed, using glutamate receptor-like proteins as the transmission mechanism. Glutamate is one of the primary excitatory neurotransmitters in the human brain. The plant is using a molecular family recognizable from neuroscience to carry an alarm signal from a damaged leaf to every other part of its body. Once the signal arrives at undamaged leaves, those leaves activate defense chemistry before the caterpillar gets there. The plant lacks a brain and a nervous system. What it apparently does have is a calcium-based electrical signaling network using neurotransmitter-adjacent chemistry that travels the length of the plant in roughly the time it takes you to read this sentence. Most people assume plants don't feel anything in any meaningful sense because they don't have pain receptors or nervous tissue. These are not metaphorical signals. They are measurable electrical impulses using chemistry that's recognizable from neuroscience, and they result in coordinated behavioral changes across the whole organism. The threshold for what counts as something like a nervous system is starting to feel less settled than it did. The parasitic vine that can smell. Dodder is a parasitic plant that grows across North America and Europe, and it looks like someone draped orange string across the hedgerow. Most people who walk past it every day have no particular feelings about it. Here's the detail that changes that. Before daughter makes physical contact with the host plant, it can detect the host's chemical signature in the air, not through roots or physical touch, through airborne compounds released by the host. And it doesn't respond equally to all plants. In a study from the University of California, Davis, researchers placed daughter seedlings equidistant from tomato plants and wheat plants, with no physical connection between any of them. The daughter grew consistently toward the tomatoes, which are a better host, and away from the wheat. Then they took it further. They ran the experiment with artificial chemical blends that mimic the odor profiles of each plant, no actual plants present. The daughter still moved toward the tomato blend. It detected airborne chemistry, evaluated 2 options, and moved toward the better one. Plants don't have noses, but they have receptor systems in their tissues that identify chemical information from the surrounding environment and translate it into growth decisions. What that process is called depends on how uncomfortable you want to be with the implications. The vine identifies the most nutritious available host and grows toward it. It is, nutritionally speaking, more discerning than a significant portion of the human population. The forest, that's actually one conversation. Every forest you've ever walked through had something happening in the soil beneath your feet the entire time. Trees are connected to each other through networks of fungal threads called mycorrhizae, fine filaments that weave through the soil and attach to root systems across enormous areas. Carbon, phosphorus, and water move along these networks between trees. That part has been understood for a while. The part that's harder to sit with is what Suzanne Simard and other researchers found when they looked at what else was traveling. In forests under insect attack, trees connected to the mycorrhizal network increase their tannin and defense chemical production before the insects reach them. Trees that are not connected to the network don't show the same response. The connected trees are receiving information about a threat they haven't encountered yet and producing a defensive response in advance. In a healthy temperate forest, a single mature tree can be connected to hundreds of others through the same network. That network is not dormant. It's actively moving chemical signals between organisms continuously. Scientists initially resisted using the word communication to describe this, because communication implies intent, and intent is a word the scientific community has historically preferred to keep away from plants. The plants have continued sending signals through the network while the terminology debate proceeds. Everything you've thought of as a forest of separate trees is more accurately described as a network of organisms exchanging information below the surface. That's been true every time you've walked through one. Nobody mentioned it. If you want to keep hearing things nobody mentioned, subscribing would be a reasonable response. Thanks. The Venus flytrap counts to 5. Venus flytraps are sold at grocery stores. They sit on windowsills. People poke them for entertainment. Most of those people have no idea the plant is counting. The trap has 2 lobes, lined with small trigger hairs. A single touch does nothing. 2 touches within about 20 to 30 seconds closes the trap. 5 touches starts producing digestive enzymes. More touches ramp up enzyme production proportionally. A 2020 study confirmed that this graduated response is mediated by calcium signals, with each touch adding to an accumulating electrical count that the plant reads and responds to differently depending on the total. 1 touch. Possible false alarm, ignore it. 2. Something is probably in there. Close up. 5. Something is definitely in there and struggling. Begin digesting. More. Large prey produce more enzymes. The plant is not just reacting to contact. It's integrating inputs across time, weighting them, and producing calibrated responses based on accumulated information. The common assumption is that the trap closes on contact, a simple mechanical trigger like a mousetrap. It doesn't work that way. The plant runs what is effectively a multi-factor confirmation check before committing resources to digestion, and adjusts the intensity of its response based on how many additional signals it receives after closing. It counts to 5. It does this without a brain, without neurons, and without any structure that resembles a counting mechanism in any organism we'd normally describe as capable of counting. It does it anyway. The trees that warn each other. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, acacia trees have developed a response to being eaten that goes considerably further than just producing more tannin. When a giraffe begins browsing on an acacia, the tree releases ethylene gas into the air. That gas travels downwind. Neighboring acacia trees, receiving the ethylene before any giraffe has touched them, begin increasing their tannin content in advance. The tannin makes the leaves less palatable and nutritionally available. The trees that received the chemical warning are already fortified by the time the giraffe arrives. Ethylene is a gas humans use industrially to synchronize the ripening of fruit during commercial shipping. The acacia trees were using it as an airborne chemical signal between organisms long before that application was discovered. The more uncomfortable detail involves the giraffes. Animals that live near these acacia populations tend to feed upwind, or skip trees in an irregular pattern rather than browsing sequentially. The leading interpretation is that the giraffes have learned, over time, that the trees communicate with each other and have adjusted their feeding behavior accordingly. The giraffe has a brain and decades of experience. The acacia has neither. The arms race appears to be roughly even at the moment. Plants that teach their children. Arabidopsis thaliana is the white lab mouse of the plant world, a small, fast-growing weed that molecular biologists use for genetic research because it's easy to work with and completes its full life cycle in about 6 weeks. Researchers studying stress responses in Arabidopsis found something that wasn't in the original research questions. Plants that had experienced drought, heat, or pathogen attack didn't just respond in the moment, they changed. After a stress event, these plants activated their defense responses faster and more strongly when they encountered the same stressor again. Their experience had modified their behavior. That part is unusual enough. The part that raises more difficult questions is what happened to the seeds. In multiple studies, offspring of stress-primed Arabidopsis plants showed enhanced stress responses to the same stressor their parents had experienced, without having encountered it themselves. The stress experience of one generation altered the epigenetic state of the DNA in the seeds, and the offspring inherited a primed defensive posture before they'd ever faced the threat. Epigenetic inheritance in response to environmental stress is something we study in humans in the context of trauma research and intergenerational health effects. The mechanism in Arabidopsis is chemical modifications to the proteins that DNA wraps around, writing the memory of an experience into molecular structure, rather than neural tissue. The plant has no memory in any conventional sense, cannot communicate with its offspring, and stores no subjective experience. The offspring are better prepared for the same threat anyway. How that information got from one generation to the next, without any brain involved at any point, remains an open question in the research. Corn roots grow toward the sound of water. Here's where the accumulated evidence stops being merely unusual and starts requiring a different kind of explanation. Monica Gagliano's 2017 work on plant responses to sound found that corn roots would grow toward the sound of running water, which is interesting but arguably explainable. Plants respond to moisture and water makes sounds, so maybe the root is detecting vibrations that correlate with moisture. Then Gagliano ran a version of the experiment using recorded sound of water, played through a speaker, with no moisture gradient present whatsoever. The roots still grew toward the speaker. No water, no moisture cues, no chemical signals from a water source, just the acoustic pattern of water through air from a recording. The roots detected it and grew toward it. The mechanism by which a plant root detects, distinguishes, and directionally responds to acoustic information in the absence of the thing that sound usually indicates is not currently understood. This is not a fringe result from an unreviewed paper. It has been published in peer-reviewed journals and has attracted serious scientific attention, along with serious scientific disagreement, which is where the research currently sits. What it suggests, if the result holds, is that the plant isn't just running chemical detection and growing toward moisture. It's processing acoustic information as a proxy for something it needs. That's a sensory processing claim. It's the kind of claim that, applied to any animal, would prompt no controversy whatsoever. Applied to a corn plant, it turns out to require years of careful debate about what words mean and what counts as evidence. Scientists are still determining what to call what plants are doing in these experiments. The plants, for their part, have not weighed in. They're busy growing toward the sound of water that isn't there. If this changed how you look at the plants you walk past every day, subscribing means you won't miss what's next.
Thanks for watching.